I was experimenting with different kinds of screw heads. That's not a bad looking screw head. It's not a regular round head, it's just something I had from a model maker in a 440. So I've drilled and tapped this hole for this nipple that I made. Now notice that I threaded the end of this such that there isn't so much thread that this is going to go all the way in and interfere with the valve. So it'll only go in a little ways. And then I did indeed run a 1/4 inch reamer through the valve hole, because of course there was a burr left by the drilling and the tapping. So that being done, the next thing I want to do is to drill this steam port right here. That's 1/8 inch diameter, and you see I drilled it from this side and then plugged it, so it's drilled all the way through. I'm going to, this is about 3/16 down, probably a little farther down than it needs to be. It needs to be down far enough so that when the piston comes up it doesn't ever cover that. I don't want it to be covered. So I'm going to change this dimension so it is 1/8 of an inch. And I've already laid it out. It's on the center line, 1/8 of an inch down, and it's an 1/8 of an inch hole all the way through. So that's what I'll do next. Okay, the hole has been drilled and I'm going to plug it, or I already have plugged it, and that's just a piece of 1/8 inch aluminum, but I pinched the end of it and it's distorted and I drove it in there, and now I'll trim it off and sand it and you won't hardly see it. Notice that I made this dimension a little thicker than what I made this one, and even thicker than what I told you originally in the first part of the video. But the reason for that is I wanted a little more wall thickness here for this threaded nipple. And I had considered using some of these other nipples. Where are they? But you know, this is just way out of proportion to put in there. And I had some smaller ones that looked like this that could have been put in at a right angle, but even that was bigger than what I wanted. But I wanted a 3/16 OD here for that hose that I have coming from my little boiler. So I'll go ahead and trim that and sand that down off camera, and that concludes another day's work. I'm back and it's yet another day. And what I'm going to do first today, I got to make a little modification here. I'm going to have to trim this where you see the black line and drill and tap a new hole, because I need this clearance here. This one was trimmed and I think I forgot about that. That's the problem with not having a drawing. So I'll do that off camera. And then the next thing I want to do, and I've talked about hobby brass as far as this bearing or bushing here, this brass bushing, and this is what I often use, is this, I call it hobby brass. You can get it at any hardware store or home center. It comes in 12-inch lengths, and you buy it by the OD, but the ID is usually 1/16 under. So it's a little loose, but rather than use this, and I guess I didn't use it in this one, that was brass that was a solid brass that was drilled and reamed. So that's what I'm going to do, and I think I'll make it 5/16. So I will be locating the hole here and drilling and reaming that hole, and that hole will be from the bottom. I'm going to take the dimension right off of this. One inch up. I'm going to measure that a little closer off camera, and then I'll drill and ream, and I'll also make this bushing, which is just a simple turning project off, and drilling and reaming off camera. I've done several operations. Number one, I trimmed this off as promised and drilled and tapped that hole. I took a skim coat off of here just to true that up and where I had plugged it. Now I'm ready to drill the hole for the main bearing, and this is the main bearing that I just drilled and reamed at 3/16. It's 5/16 OD brass. So I will drill this hole right now, or I'm going to use the starter bit, and then I will ream it 5/16. And I changed one dimension here now. The distance from the bottom to the hole is 1 inch 100 thousandths. From here to here, 1 inch 100 thousandths, and of course it's on the center line the other way. And I'll drill that and ream it off camera. That hole is drilled and reamed, and the bearing is in there, and now it's a good fit, but I can still move it. I do not know how long the bearing needs to be at this time, so it will have to probably be trimmed as far as the length is concerned. Also, I do not know the exact location of it. I may drill and tap a hole there and have a little set screw to hold that in place, or at least so I can adjust it back and forth. Generally, I Loctite it when I'm done, but I think I'll go with the set screw method. Now, on the bottom, I have 832 transfer screws mounted, and looking at the base here now, I have a center line, and this line right here is 1/2 inch in from the end, from the sides. And I'm going to transfer the holes. Compare it now to this one. And what I think I'll do here is to get the square on there, get it just where I want it, and then I'm going to wrap it on the top with the plastic hammer and mark those holes. The engine is mounted to the base with those little flathead cap screws, 832s. Now I also put that set screw in here as promised, and that will hold the bearing in place. Now when you drill and tap a small hole like that, be sure and use a clearance hole. So the threaded portion is only that little spot between the red line and the brass. The rest, as you can see, is a clearance. Less chance of breaking the tap, especially in harder materials. The next thing I believe I will do is to go ahead and make the main shaft, which will be 3/16, and the crank disc. So I'll get started on that. This is the original engine here, and the crank disc is 1 inch in diameter. I got kind of dangerously close to the edge there with the pin, so I decided to make that just a little bit larger in diameter, and this is actually 1 1/4 inch aluminum. I turned it down to about, or 1 1/8 rather, I turned it down to about 1 1/16. I've already reamed it 3/16, and I'll cut it off now. I'm going to make it 1/4 inch thick. I'll cut it off in the lathe. And I intend to Loctite it onto the shaft. But you certainly can pin it, or if you're in the mood, a set screw like what I have right here, if you don't use Loctite. Now there's also other alternatives on how to make that, and in fact on many of my engines I made the crank like this with a little pretend pseudo counterweight, And I had those in different sizes depending on the engine, but those were casting, so I'm not going to deal with those now, and I don't really have any extra ones. And my foundry, of course, as you know, is a Fairweather foundry. Again, reamed 3/16, and then I measured out 3/8 of an inch and punched a hole right here. Remember that this is a 3/4 inch stroke, so the throw is 3/8. So from the center of the shaft to that center punch mark is 3/8. 3/8. And I'm going to drill and ream that. I probably could just get away with reaming at 3/32 because that's the size of the little brass pin I'm going to use. It's 3/32 brazing rod actually. But look at how I'm holding this. Well, I still got something to hang on to. It's kind of difficult for me to handle just a little disc like this on the drill press because they move around and lift on you like a tiddlywink. I haven't thought about tiddlywinks in 40 years. We used to play that when we were kids, because we didn't have video games. Alright, I'll do this off camera. Well, there's the crank disc virtually done. This is the face side, this is the cutoff side. Now, correction. This is a 1/8 hole for the crank pin. I think I said 3/32 before. It's 1/8, so I have reamed that 1/8. What I will do now, and this is the shaft, is 3/16 cold roll steel, and it could be brass. Don't use aluminum. And I'm going to put this on with Loctite and then just let it set, and I'll get back to this tomorrow, but because there's plenty of other things to do in the meantime. But what I'll do after the Loctite sets up, and I'll face this off and get a better finish, at which time I will make the little crank pin. Well, it's just 1/8 inch brazing rod. I think I said 3/32 before, 1/8 inch, and I'll Loctite that in and then set it aside. Then that's done. Now, while I'm talking here, I get a lot of comments that says my voice sounds like Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart was one of my favorites when I was a kid, and for that matter still is. But if you let me know if you think it does, and I don't think it does, my brother doesn't, but I think I do something with words where I end up with the like that when I listen to myself, which I don't like listening to myself, but maybe that's where they get in the Jimmy Stewart business. I don't know. That's just a little sideline. So let me talk about flywheels again. Before I get to flywheels, one more note here. I just polished this ever so lightly with 220, actually it's 320 abrasive cloth, so that you got a good fit and you don't have any binding in your bearing. And I did that before I mounted this. Now when you use Loctite, this is red Loctite. I don't know what grade it is because it's so cruddy here. I've had this forever. There isn't much left. These are only half full when you get them, you know. So be sure and clean with, I use brake fluid. I clean that hole. There are Loctite cleaners and Loctite primers and all of that too, but mine always end up dried up by the time I need them. And just put that in there. I like to put just a little bit right here too, because it'll get sucked in by capillary action. Now you don't want a press fit. You got to have a fit that's loose enough where there's some room for some of the Loctite, which is anaerobic, as you well know, meaning that it sets up in the lac, with the lac when there is no oxygen. All right, I'll set that aside, and back to flywheels. As I told you before, I intend to use this flywheel because I like a spoked flywheel, and that was again our hard lead made from wheel weights and lead type. It has antimony in it, so it's relatively hard, but yet certainly not as hard as steel. But you won't be able to have one of those. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to make a steel flywheel, and you can dish it out like this if you're in the mood, or it can just be flat, and it's 2.5 diameter, 3/16 bore, of course, and this is about 1/2 inch thick, and you will need to put a set screw in there. So that's what that's all about. But of course it's a clearance hole, clear down, you know, probably a full inch down, and then the last little bit is threaded. So that's how you'll do it. But if you do not want to do this and you prefer this business here, take a look at these videos of mine, Machine Shop Tips 153, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All of those videos deal with laying out and drilling bolt circles. If you like the appearance of bolt circles, and I showed many different, or actually 5 different ways of doing that, how to lay them out, how to drill them using rotary table and dividing head, or just plain how to lay them out and drill them if you do not have those attachments, because I think that looks better aesthetically than this, but that's a matter of opinion. This is made out of lead alloy free machining steel. Have you noticed that it very quickly picks up rust? This is only a year old, and just being in my basement, which is semi-dry, I use a dehumidifier in the summer, it rusts. So of course you can paint these too, but that's the nature of that lead alloy 300 that I use to lightly rust. So that's all I'm going to say about flywheels, and this of course is the one that I've used, and I do have a video showing how I cast those, and I forgot what the title is, but it's one of my videos, because I think I show the mold also, how the mold was made and how I pour these. So if that is of interest to you, you can go back and look at that as well. My workbench is getting pretty messy, but I do kind of clean it up at the end of each work session. But while I'm waiting for the Loctite to harden, or set I should say, on that piece, I'm going to turn my attention, and that won't be till tomorrow, turn my attention to the eccentric and the eccentric strap. Now I'm not going to say much about this eccentric other than I'm going to give you some dimensions right now, but I have a complete video on how to make that. That's tips number 160, which I made quite a while ago, making eccentrics for steam engines, and I'm talking about this exact one. And in that video I use this, where did I put it? I made this specifically for this. This is offset, so when I turn this in the lathe, you know, I can turn the throw, if that's what we call that. Eccentric. You know, eccentric means off-center. So you talk about an eccentric person. Some people say I'm eccentric. You're just a little bit off-center, is what that means. But I show another way of doing it. I forgot whether it was with the 3-jaw chuck or a 4-jaw chuck, using a shim to put it off-center. So there's several methods of doing that. And if you've never done one, it might seem a little bit difficult for you. But looking at these dimensions here, and I'm trying to figure out why now. I thought I had 3/4 brass, but you can make this out of 3/4 brass, but this is a 787, which is about 25-30 seconds diameter brass. I don't know where I got that or why I used that, but that's what I'm using, and I still got a lot of that left. I think I got another bar of it someplace too, if I can find it. But that aside, this diameter right here is also 500 thousandths, actually just a little bit less, so that it will have a free fit in the eccentric strap. Right here we've got a little over 1/4 inch thick, and the thickness right here will vary depending on the thickness of your brass. Now make this out of brass, not steel. Well, you could make it out of steel, such that when you put the sandwich together it doesn't clamp it, like Jed Clampett. Remember him? See how that works? The brass that I'm using is 43 thousandths thick. And these were parts of doors off the old school building, and there was a time, I forgot what, I think it was probably in the 70s or 80s, they had that life safety money. All the doors, you know, hundreds of doors in the school, good old oak doors with glass in them, were thrown away, and new fireproof doors, blah blah blah, all kinds of specifications, you know. So I salvaged a lot of those kick plates. These are kick plates off of the bottom of the doors, and believe me, in a high school they get kicked. And they use real brass then. I think now they even use some plastic on that. It's just sacrilege to me, but I like that real brass. So a lot of that was thrown away or scrapped. I don't know what happened to it, but I did manage to get some of it, and even took some of it home. Kept some of it there in the school shop. But then that all got thrown away when the building was torn down. And that building is long gone. The building was built in 1938. Look carefully now. I'm showing you the amount of throw on that eccentric. It's 1/4 of an inch. That scribe line just barely disappears, and as I raise this, there's another scribe line. Doesn't quite show up, but I measured the distance between the two scribe lines, and it's 1/4 of an inch. You'll need a set screw to hold this to the shaft, and that allows you to time it. I mentioned that before. And this is just a piece of brass, reamed 1/4 inch, and it's the same diameter brass, and it's a spacer. It's a washer. Now you can make this whatever thickness you need to make it. That is undetermined at this time. That's also going to depend on how much of a brass bearing you've got sticking out. So that will vary from engine to engine. Let's talk about making this strap, and this is a little nightmare. It's one of the most difficult and time-consuming things on the whole engine. And let's get started on this, because I have already laid out, not laid out, I put some bluing on this brass. Now I have the luxury of tracing it, because I've made many of these over a period of time. Now be sure and make this part here extra long, because we're going to trim it to what length we need later on. I don't know what length that needs to be, but I'm going to trace this very carefully. Then the first thing I will do is to drill this 1/2 inch hole. But I tell you, don't use a regular twist drill. You'll just hate it, because it's going to grab it, jerk it out of the vise. You know how brass is when you drill it, or if you're don't try to hang on to this, it'll just pull it right out of your hand and flip it around and cut you. So what I discovered only fairly recently, and I'd seen these in stores, and I thought, well, it's just another gadget like they sell on TV. But these are not to be mocked. I call them a Christmas tree bit, but I think unibit, yeah, they're called a unibit. And they do not grab, and one of these steps on here, I like to drill a 1/8 inch hole to start, but they are self-starting. Maybe I'll just self-start it. And go up to the 1/2 inch, and they are marked as such. Can you see that? And these aren't cheap. Do not buy an imitation one. Buy the genuine one, and I believe that they are $20–25. But worth it.